I'll be the first to say that part of my life has been defined by being first generation. It's part of what makes me a cross-cultural kid and very much has influenced how I see and engage with the world. And while I know that my experiences have an American tinted lens, I've always had a general curiosity about other first generationers, especially those whose parents left their home of origin to move for opportunities in the West. This is why Ronke Lawal is this week's guest. Ronke is the founder and lead at Ariatu Public Relations, a London-based PR firm with a particular emphasis on reaching the African and Caribbean diaspora audiences. Not only does she have a sweet spot for amplifying Black and Brown voices in the media, she's also keen about having conversations around race, ethnicity, and class, and the nuances that come with it. Ronke and I spend a significant amount of time discussing our own first-gen experiences, especially how to define your identity within a British or American context. We also talk about the cost of assimilation for the working class, why corporate brands often fail at messaging when it comes to social justice, and her own experiences studying abroad in the US. I first connected with her years ago on social media, and honestly, I've been learning and laughing ever since. Welcome to the chatter. So as you're talking about movement and we're talking about freedom of movement, you are, and correct me if I'm wrong, how do you identify? Are you British Nigerian, Nigerian British, first gen, second gen? I know, these are loaded, how do you identify? So before I throw it there, what do you call yourself?
I love this question because I've always said I am both British Nigerian, Black British or Nigerian British, whichever order you want to call it. I am all of the above. So yeah, I mean, primarily I'd say British Nigerian, whichever order, because some people might say, well, why have you put the British first? Well, okay.
Right, of course.
I'm very rooted and very much aware that I'm a Nigerian born in Britain. And I know some people won't like that. And, you know, there are things that are missing from my identity, right? So my ability, for example, to speak Yoruba, my ethnic group, from my parents' ethnic group, and my ethnic group is Yoruba, right? My ability to speak it is limited. Partly, you know, anybody who studies colonial history will know there's partly a reason why. It's not unusual to find a whole generation like myself where the parents focus more on speaking English than teaching us our native tongue. So though I speak and understand it, it's not as good as it or it could be. And so that causes a bit of a disadvantage, and that causes also people to think that, oh no, you are just definitely British. But I'm very much rooted in being Nigerian, and I'm Nigerian because I can't just, it's a spiritual thing. I can't not. It's not I don't have a choice. I can't, it's not even about race, right? It's, well, you know, it is, but it's not in the same vein. It is who I am. Like, I can't remove myself from being Nigerian in much in the same way as I can't remove myself from being British, because I was born and raised in Britain, in England. So I can't remove that part of my identity, and I wouldn't want to. I can complain about England till the cows come home, but there is a reason I was planted here. I always say, and I'm a believer in God's plan. So there's always a reason for things. So there's a reason I was planted here. So if I were to say, dismiss that part of me, I kind of feel that's a bit of an insult to the plan of my purpose. Getting deep now.
No. Well, and so I would love you to walk me through this. Because I think there's some similarities in our mutual stories. I'm first generation American, right? So my family came from Cameroon, so your neighbors to the east. And so I'm curious. So when did your parents come over, and kind of what was the motivation for them, if they came straight from Nigeria or somewhere else, to come to the UK?
Beautiful question. And I love talking about this question, probably because my mum in particular talks about it a lot. So we
Right.
see her mummies and she's just talking about it a lot. But anyway, so my parents came to Europe in the late 70s. Their first destination or location or point of landing was Belgium. So I could have been born in Belgium. Yeah. So that was their first point of entry into that experience. I think at that time there were a lot of opportunities in certain parts of Europe, right? So Belgium is one of those areas, and it was a gateway before coming to the UK. So you'd think actually it could have come to the UK first, but for some reason I think there were opportunities for them there. My parents came, that's the age-old story. They came because they thought there were more opportunities. Interestingly enough, more so from my dad's side and my mum's side. My mum actually had better opportunities in Nigeria. So she came from so it's, how do we define class? So a borderline, a kind of middle class, but lower middle class, working class, middle class background. I won't say it was 100% working class, because there was elements of middle class in her family, right? But she had a really good opportunity in Nigeria, and then she fell in love at the time with my dad, and dad was like, "Let's go and start a new life in Europe." So he took her to Belgium, and she says, and verbatim, like quote unquote, it was one of the most terrible experience. She said she learned a lot, so she doesn't regret what she learned. She learned about humans. She learned a lot, but she said there was like the racism that she experienced in Belgium was just the most. It was just terrible. Like, honestly. So then they moved to the UK, and they gave birth. They had me. And around that time there was a great diasporan connection. So there's a lot of like Nigerians or Anglophone West Africans as well, and the Caribbean community. So they built their own little community and hub. But we were planted as working class in this country. So in the UK, we were working class. So I'm the first generation, and it was tough. Actually, it was tough. I can't say anything more than that. It was really hard. And my parents are quite radical thinkers in the sense of they spoke very honestly about race, colonialism, imperialism. They spoke about the world at large. There were limitations, My dad, he was studying. He thought, by studying and getting his education in Europe, it offered him more opportunities. So hence starting in Belgium and finishing in London. But the way the world works, I don't think I've ever said this on any platform before, but I'm going to say this now. No, but I'm going to say this now. I think, and he knows this as well. I think the institutional structural racism and the colonial structures of this world kind of robbed him partly of his dream, because he was a very ambitious man, and he did okay, but actually I think the way in which this country can sometimes suck the life out of you, especially if you're from working classes. It's harder than just simply saying we're going to work hard, right? You can work hard, but you get tired at the end of the day, right? And I think this country it robbed him of his dreams. Let me just say that it robbed him of his dreams. Yeah. I've never said that before.
You know what? And I think I feel like I've had this conversation with someone else, but I don't think we often talk about. And I'm saying specifically those of us who are of African descent, but I think this could actually apply to a whole lot of different immigrant groups. We don't talk about what families left behind and what they gave up for this, right? I mean, I imagine, I have somewhat of a similar story where my parents came in the mid 70s to the United States, and you give up not knowing anyone or having that one or two or maybe three relatives in a spot. You give up what you've known, you've given up a way that you've done things, and you've given up where you are now a minority, at least physically. Right? Like because I find when I talk about the Black expat and I am talking about people moving to places or whatever, and I go, for me, it was interesting. Born in a country where you're a minority, moving to a country where you're in the majority, coming back to a country where you're a minority. That's a whole nother conversation. But like to be in a place where everybody looks like you, at least on the outside, and then going to a place, and then in the cases of our parents, going to the places that colonized the place you had to leave because they colonized it, and in some cases didn't always leave it better. I mean, it's like a weird abusive relationship. I mean, that's just me. Like,
it's this dysfunctional. I say it all the time. But it's a weird dysfunctional relationship with these with these countries that we find ourselves in. But at the same time, it's like you rightly said, like our countries of origin aren't necessarily. They've not been left in a good way, unless you have the privileges of wealth or class, which I guess we can talk about. But it's incredible.
Well, then I bring it full circle to what you said earlier, in the sense that, okay, now you get mad that these people want to come to your country, but you went to their country first, talked about how great your country was and how it was the mothership, and then now get mad because after years and decades and centuries of saying all, you're part of the British Empire, you're part of the French Empire, you're part of the Belgian Empire. Well, I don't even know if the Belgians even said that.
No, they just took. He just took.
I'm trying. Look, girl, I started reading the history. I forgot what book it was. And I said, nah, y'all ain't gonna catch me today, because I'm trying to keep what's left of my sanity, because I was so mad. Like, I spend way too much time reading about colonial history and events, and I was so frustrated and mad. And so, that's why when I think about what our parents gave up and then what they have to deal with to even get some sort of dream. Because here's the thing. I think we're probably amongst the first, second, maybe third generation because I think African movement en masse in a lot of ways is a little bit more recent than other groups.
I think so.
I don't know. For the UK, would you say? Well, I don't know. How does it look in the UK? Because it might be a little bit different.
No, I'd say we had there were, there's always, because I think people have to remember there's always exceptions to the rule. There were always, so during the colonial peak, or when things were quote unquote good, I'm always being careful of the word language. You can tell I'm a communicator. When things were good in the colonial empires, they would allow.
I was like, that's like such a long add-on. It's like in parentheses, in the colonial times, that didn't have anything to do with us. Right. But carry on.
So I'm going to speak from the Anglophone perspective. So in the when the British empires, they would allow, or they would encourage, scholars, academics, thinkers to study. So that you'd find the middle and upper middle classes would actually, I think even as early as the 40s, I could be wrong, after the war, let's just say after the war actually, they could go to university, private schools, universities, they had properties, but these were the very up there well-to-do, or whether they were either the elites or the upper middle classes, right? Now, when it comes to the working class, or the working classes, I'd say en masse, from specifically Nigeria, more the 80s. So around the time that my parents landed in the UK, more the 80s was the working class kind of coming. It was slightly, I don't want to call it easy. It was slightly easier, but it wasn't easy. But there were different rules in place in terms of if you give birth to a child in the UK, what that would do to your citizenship and stuff. The Caribbean population, again, you've had a Windrush, so that was slightly different as well. But the thing about this, and this is why conversations like this are so fascinating, and people forget the levels of layers of nuance and why the empire works so well, and why I keep referencing class. There's a reason, right? Because by allowing the elites of our nations to move freely, to study in the best universities in Europe and in the UK, to buy properties, because there's generations who have properties in Mayfair, but the elites are Nigerians, right?
Mm-hmm.
But by allowing it, what you're doing is you're maintaining that imperial stronghold. So for whatever reason, when you decide to leave or you have to leave, the empire will still be strong in Nigeria, right? Because you still have the elites, and we see it to this day. You still have the structure, the structural forces, the influence of the empire still very much exists. Because if you look at the facts, if you look at the facts of the country that has been created, which is Nigeria, you see how the empire has influenced that country and how elitism and classism has influenced everything. And that includes the movement. You know, when we talk about why the working class population moved in the 80s, I mean, if you look at it, like, there was nothing, it was only a subset of Nigerians that were doing quite well at one point during colonial. When we got our independence, there was still some, you know, it was doing okay, but by the 80s, 70s, there's a vast majority of the population who had degrees, you know, educated, but they weren't getting the kinds of jobs that actually you should be getting. Like, you know, at least in this, I hate to say it, at least if you look at it, if the world of fair, if you do your degree, get a good job, and then you can rise through the ranks financially. But that wasn't really happening, and that's why you'll find a lot of working classes moving in the 80s. But it's layers to it. It's not as simple as just one group or one specific type of group moving into the UK at a certain point. There's layers to it.
Well, and I think you touched on something then when we look at the continent, because if you've had this small subset that has been educated, right, at 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the aughts, right? And then they somehow, because I look at Cameroon, they now come into leadership positions because they've been vetted. I mean,
this is it. It's not a conspiracy. I mean, if we're
no, because I mean, let's be honest. Like when we look at Cameroon, like the dude who's president, look, first of all, he has been president since 82.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally
he was but he was educated in France. Right? And so, and he was educated. Remember, the man's old because he's in his late 80s, 90s, right? So he was educated like what, pre the end of colonialism.
Right, pre-independence, right? Exactly what I'm saying. Exactly.
And then you're right. There's still norms that are reinforced about, oh, well, France is this amazing place. You know, if you're from French West Africa, because all these things that we like that are European are French or Belgian. And then it's like this never ending cycle, right? And we'll talk about this in a moment, but even when we look at social media and we see what a lot of these people say and some of the norms they're reinforcing, I just keep going, man, you have magically absorbed the same principles that have managed to keep your communities from moving forward. And just because you look like them does not mean you too cannot be an oppressor. This is for a moment.
This is it. And this is where we've got to be careful. I'm always cautious of, you know, how are we influencing each other and engaging? Because so if we go back to the conversation we're having about Brexit, right? The reason it works so well is because they convince the masses. The majority of the people in this country, they just want a very standard life, right? A safe home,
of course,
a job,
of course,
food to eat. As long as everything's running, and it tends to, electricity, water, everything runs, there should be no reason why they should be fearful of any extent. Right? Do you know what I mean? They should actually see any foreign additions to their population as an advantage. But unfortunately, because when they package propaganda in that way, instead of them to look at the leaders and look at the people at power and say, actually, it's the elites and the government who are doing me wrong, they're going to blame the Black and brown people, or the people who don't speak their language, on all the problems that they have. So I think Yeah, I think, and this is a similarity I find with our nations of origin as well. Because if we really look at the statistical reference points in terms of, you know, some of our countries that we do, there's this thing I'm really annoyed about. It's kind of like the Africa they don't show you society. I make a joke about it. Because look, we know there are mansions in African countries.
Right.
We know we know all of this stuff, that there's roads and we know, like, that's not, who are we even telling that to? Like,
right.
They really care, because they bypass that to go and take selfies in villages anyway. Like, if they, it doesn't make any sense. Like, who are you telling that to? And then you kind of get there and it's like, okay, so if you're saying all of this, look at the vast majority of the population of your country. The statistics are scary when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to wealth inequality, when it comes to housing. Like, we saw recently, last year, the end of 2020, the End SARS protest. It unmasked the things we already know, but I think it drew a lot of attention to the fact that Nigeria is not a country that we should be putting on any kind of a pedestal, if that makes sense. Like, we can call ourselves a giant of Africa, but really.
Man, I saw and girl, I know you Nigeria, but I saw a quote and I laughed for like 5 minutes, and then I was like,
"Oh no,
no!" And no, I mean, it throws shade over here too, so it's whatever. I something was going on, and there was a bunch of different Africans in the thread, and basically someone said, Nigeria is kind of like the Americans of Africa. And I saw that and I was like, see? Because the implication. I was like,
this is the thing.
Are they wrong?
This is the thing. You know what? The problem with this is, like, I want to defend, and I should really defend. Like, logically, I should be like,
you should defend
the integrity. But then I feel like every so often, like, Nigerian will come and, like, embarrass. So, like, there's always like a clip. There was a clip of some Nigerian Trump supporters in Nigeria.
And he retweeted it, and I said, what?
How am I going to defend the country that's not defending itself? Like,
why am I expending the energy? Exactly. Yeah. When people are working so hard to be contrarian. No, I saw that. And I said, this is hella funny. And I'm like, I'm not, because but I'm also American. So it was not like it made me out any better. I completely, because I got it. I went, this is very accurate. All right. So when we come back, we're going to get into kind of your experience as a first gen Brit, and we're going to really talk about, especially comparisons. I'm on the other side of the pond, as well as more about your communication work. So after the break. If you're listening to the Global Chatter, there's a good chance you like stories about expat life, identity, and more, which is why I'm going to recommend you check out Flourish in the Foreign by Christine Job. Her podcast elevates and affirms the stories of Black women living and thriving abroad, and it explores expat living as a pathway to wellness. Flourish in the Foreign is available wherever you get your podcast. All right, and we're back on this conversation, and so I kind of want to pick up really talking about, I think, some of our shared experiences as being first gen. I love talking about what I see. And in my case, I did grow up both in the US and Cameroon. I know that you have been in not Nigeria, you've been in the UK, but obviously very heavily influenced. And so I'm just curious, just from the stuff that you see, what do you think are the differences for folks who are like you, who maybe have been born in the UK or came to the UK or Europe very young, and the influences that you have from the kind of your countries of, or at least ethnic origin, compared to maybe what you see with some of us who are American? Like, what do you think are the differences?
That's a great question, actually. And I'm really careful with that, because my experience is going to be different from other people's experiences. I think it also depends on how often you get a chance to go back to your country of origin. We used to go that was our one holiday that we could afford. So every 3 or 4 years, we used to save. My parents, I'd say, would save. And in the summer holidays, so about 6 weeks, we would be in Lagos, right? So I knew this is it. We had our culture and our cultural identity tied to us both at home as much as possible, where we lived, but also when we could go back for our holiday, so to speak, we'd go. So compared to America, though, this is interesting. I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's more of a sense of I feel like I see and I can find opportunities to identify with being Nigerian in maybe it's because I'm in London. So in London. So there are markets, there are restaurants, there might not, people complain sometimes, they're not the best, whatever, but it's very easy to identify where you can go to link, to touch a part of your identity. Does that make sense? In London, right? So even in the UK, as there's different cities in the UK, so in Manchester, in Liverpool, there are places you can go to still find your community. And I feel like, and you might have it in America. I think we also have a tradition here. We had, not so much anymore, even pre-pandemic, but we had, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, something called hall parties. And you might have that in the States, where you'd have, whatever the excuse, a birthday, a naming ceremony, wedding reception, you'd have giant, people would just hire out a sports hall. They weren't luxurious settings. There was sports hall, a community center, and you'd have all night parties, just all night parties with members of your diaspora community, and you just coolers of rice and food and music. So there was a regularity of meeting and celebration that we had that will keep us linked to our cultural identity. So I feel like there is a sense of knowingness and belonging. And because as well, I do think the geographical, even though it's still expensive, the fact that we're not as far,
I think that's a really home, so to speak, good point, because I've always thought that those of you who are in Europe,
I don't know,
or in the UK at least, right? It's a shorter flight. I think that in the US, and I think this is for a lot of immigrant groups, to be honest, we're so far, we're so far. And I think the other thing that when you talk about communities is that the country's so big. Right? Because that's the other part that I think is a very different experience if you are African or you're Caribbean in the US, maybe compared to some of our European counterparts, is that you guys have smaller countries on that side of the world. Whereas, as you know, and you've been here, you could probably make a solid 6 countries if you wanted to out of the US, just when you look at regional and differences. And so I think our challenge has been the pockets of where you get Africans, right? And so I know for me, well, I was born in DC and DMV area, right? DC, Maryland, Virginia. First of all, ton of Africa, everybody know, especially in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of Africans. Houston, Texas, a lot of Africans. I know there's a very big Nigerian population there, right? Whereas, there are Nigerians in the DMV area, but then there's also Ethiopians and Cameroonians and Ghanaians. You get into the middle of the country where you get into a Minnesota, you get a lot of East Africans. So Somalis, Eritreans, Ethiopians. And then I know there's something happening out in California. I'm not sure who's there. I know Nigerians are there, but I don't know who else is there. Because I'm an East Coast girl. So I'm somebody's out there. And then Chicago, right? Those are the areas. I mean, everywhere else is somebody got into a school. So I hate to say that. Somebody got into a school. You know what it is. Somebody got into a university which is ironic, a university maybe I've never heard of, which is insane because I work in education, but they got into a school, got them a visa, and now they all live in Wyoming. It is what it is. So it is. But it's true. Yeah, but it's true. When you're on the continent and somebody's school is going to take you, you aren't looking at ranking, unless you are, once again, the elites are like Harvard, right?
That's accurate.
You're just looking to see who will take you so that you can get here. And so I think that's a little bit different. And I think the ability to go back, because I know one of the challenges I've heard, especially for kids who are bicultural. So
Wow.
I've met a number of folks who maybe one parent is Nigerian, when one parent is African-American, for example, who've never been, like, they haven't been for a lot of reasons. It's not that they didn't want to go. It's just, it's expensive and there are probably other reasons. And the ties are a little bit different, although there's still an interest in the culture, right? Because they have the name and they have all of that. And so, especially as we're talking about identity, overall, as you know, and I've asked this question of many people, 2020 was just a tinderbox, especially when we look at police brutality and the things that were happening following the George Floyd murder. I'm curious, and you've already mentioned SARS as far as Nigeria is concerned. What is the challenges, I think, for Black folks who are living in the UK? Are those still systems, are those problems there as they may be compared to, for example, in the United States, or does it look different?
Yes, it's very much here. And the older I get, and this is where I guess being planted in this country, I say I'm planted here, born here, but it's there's this misconception that the UK is, or England specifically, because the UK is the umbrella. So England is the country that I'm in. It's a calmer, less obvious kind of on the nose racism, if that makes sense. And to be clear, the thing that we need to kind of just address is this way of measuring racism. As if all racism isn't awful. Just because one is loud and one is quiet. What does that even mean? Because fundamentally, they all marginalize and disenfranchise us. And racism is racist, whether it's the silent kind of structural one that you might not see, obvious one you see, or the violent one that you see. For me, they have the end game is the same, to keep us down. For want of a better way of saying it, to keep us down. And specifically anti-Black racism, right? There's different forms of racism, but when we talk about anti-Blackness, this is what this country is. I want to say they created it, but they are part of the creating driving force, right? Everything we're seeing in the world was because of the colonial and imperialism. It's by design, right? Even the creation of what it is to be white and Black, right? The creation of white supremacy. It was all created to kind of maintain this their view of superiority and supremacy. So in this country, there is a long history of marginalization. In this country, the fact that we have a royalist center at its core, so because we have this royal elite kind of system, this kind of this way of being, that there's this properness, this way of this English sensibility, right? This thing that however you want to call it, it can often silence, and it does that silence in itself is a form of violence, because it's mental violence, right? Because there's so many issues that go on even to this day. There's so many vast inequalities that people within, specifically, so we're speaking about Black communities, African and Caribbean communities, faced with, but because of the silencing and there's the driving force of this proper, this stiff upper lip, and we are this notion that somehow England is and I hate this tolerant country. There's this word tolerance. Amanda, they tolerate us. Imagine someone telling you, "Oh, we are tolerant." That means that they actually don't want us here, but they tolerate us because it's just to make to have peace. So it's very for me, there is this constant emotional, mental, almost trauma that I don't think genuinely we speak about enough. I think there are people who speak about it, but I don't think it, because you don't have the space and the room in this country to speak about it. So the one thing I will give the US credit for, and I always give credit where it's due, is in the US, you have space to speak on issues in a way that I don't see enough of here. Even here, conversations about history, about, Black figureheads and Black leaders in Britain. We're still having that basic conversation. We're still having that conversation. It's like, come on, like, this is this should not be difficult. But why are we still having to campaign to teach children in schools about influential Black figureheads from Britain? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But so I personally think that for all the flaws and the fundamental flaws and issues that you have in the US, there is still room and space to speak up and be vocal, even though you're faced with that same structural and institutional racism. There's space here. It's a weird thing and there's this thing as well, Amanda, of this. I call it this gratitude. They want us to be grateful here. They want this. We're supposed to be grateful for even being born here. And so we're awarded and rewarded whenever we toe the line, and we don't stir things up. But as soon as you become too vocal and you stir things up, that's when they start to cut you off.
I had a conversation with Kevin Donat, who is with Le Paris Noir. So he was born in Martinique. He lives in Paris, Black man, runs Black history tours in France. Did an interview with him last year. And I'm struck by something you said, which kind of reminds me of the conversation I had with him, in the sense that, he almost said some similar thing about France. That there are challenges. Part of the reason why he has a whole business is because he's elevating and amplifying Black voices who've been part of the history of France, right? And not just quote unquote Black French, but also Black people who came from the US, Black people who came from Africa, Black people who came from the Caribbean, right? And as you're both, as you were speaking and as he was talking, to me, I wonder if maybe, and we know that the US has had a long, convoluted history with race, but maybe part of it is because that I think might be even a bigger challenge with Europeans is that, and I could be absolutely wrong, but I wonder if it's because the US from day one was never homogenous. In theory, right? It was never, because you know this, the history of our country is so much younger compared to a UK, a France, an Italy, a Turkey, whatever, right? To honestly most of the world. And so I wonder if it's a little bit easier for us to just keep on keeping on because because the idea of, and I'm sure you've run into this, when somebody thinks of someone who's Brit, because we talked about this about France, or you think about somebody who's French, white person, if they're French, Kevin said it, what's the hat they call it? The hat. The
beret.
Yeah, I should know this is I speak French. I'm like, I actually know French. Beret, they got the baguette of, like, there's a certain look, right? When we think about somebody who's British. Do we immediately think of, there might be some people who think Idris because but like, do we immediately think of someone who's Black or brown? No.
Wow.
Even in the US, and I have traveled and had people shocked I was American. However, they can still conjure up there's still plenty of Black people who've traveled and said they've been mistaken for a Beyonce, a Serena Williams, some basketball player. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So it's a little bit, even though people may still think this is a white country, they could still find a famous Black person.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering if that's a challenge with the UK as well, that you have hundreds upon hundreds of years of history to kind of to change a narrative, right? Because it's so codified.
Absolutely. I think you just there's and if you look at the creation of the USA, it was created based on, again, everything goes back to colonialism, right? So the Native Americans had their way of doing things on that land. That's not the people who are fighting the Trumps and all of his cohorts who are fighting. That's not his land. Like, it's not your country. But okay, you created this country. You freed yourself, quote unquote, from the British. So you got your independence from the British. But you were continuing to enslave others. Others being who you would call others. Even though, and I use that word intentionally because that's how they would always say. Even though you're seen. I still believe that to some degree there's an othering of Black people in the US, regardless, right? There's an othering. So there's always that. So in the UK, you're right. There's this thing of we, and this is why I love the question you asked me. How do I identify, right? And why I always still say I'm British, Nigerian, British, whichever order. I always add Nigerian there because. And I haven't got a problem with that because you'll find that even when I say, look, on a day, if I want to be facetious, even though it's not being facetious, and someone asks me, where are you from, right? You always get that question. Always get that question. And they'll always ask that question and it's like, well, I was born in Hackney, East London, I'm British. And no, where are you really from? And they know nothing about my life or my history. All they see is this, my skin, right? So I've got the same, I sound the exact same. Like when I'm speaking to relatives in Nigeria or my friends, even my friends here who were raised in Nigeria, will say I sound more British than a British person. That's not necessarily something to be proud of. Like, I'm like, yeah, because I was raised here, that doesn't make cause. But to be British is, like you said, like there's always a link of what they think of to be British looks like and sounds like and the appearance of. So you'll always be fighting. I feel like, and to be honest with you, Amanda, I'm not interested in assimilation. I'm really not interested in trying to, like, I was born here. I don't have anything to prove. So I know my generation and subsequent generations wanted to assimilate, right? Because it was safety, and it's for their own safety. And I understand that because the way racism operates in this world, it makes you think that, okay, you have to do your best, camouflage, blend in, be almost like a chameleon, right? We know now, well, I hope we know now, that doesn't work. I've never tried to do that, and I don't think it's worth the mental gymnastics of trying to assimilate. But that can cause the problems that I was speaking about earlier. That can cause almost feeling like you're suffocating because even when you use a name earlier, you mentioned a name earlier, Idris. Even when you rise, like even when you do something glorious, there's only so far you can go, you can get to in this country before you have to leave. Someone like Idris, and I know there's a lot of conversation about Black Brits moving to the US, but if he stayed here, his talent wouldn't be recognised. You can't. You have to go. There's not just. And you know what? It's not about landmass. It's not just about the size of the country. Because Britain, the UK is still an influential country. There's a lot of opportunity here. There is opportunity here, but it's limited to who gets access to that opportunity. So I think you're right. I think there's a lot of that. There's that perspective of, okay, who gets to be British or be seen as European. Yeah. There's that whole conversation, right?
No, I mean, I think to the point that even as Black people, when we see Black people from, for example, Europe, and we're just kind of shocked because they sound like whatever country they come from. And we're just like, but I didn't think about it. And I had to talk to that with people all the time. It's like, yeah, you didn't expect them to have that accent, did you?
Right.
Well, what is an accent to you? Right? And even what you say about assimilation, I mean, so I had this really creepy conversation with a friend of mine the other day.
Your voice just kind of like, ooh, I'm in a secret.
Well, she said I was being creepy. I was just making a point. And I said, I've talked with a number of people about code switching. And I had an interview with someone, and we both said, we know we've gotten quite far in certain places and spaces in our career because we sound the way we do. I sound like this. And he sounds the way he does. And I said to my friend, this was the creepy part. I'm like, but we were created this way. You know this, right? I mean, I said, I know this sounds like a really weird horror movie, but I said, let's be honest. I said, I can only speak about my life. I went to schools in the US until age 10. I was in international schools when I was in Cameroon. I have gone to predominantly white institutions for the majority of my life. I've had access, whether through privilege or other ways. And in that process, you learn how to speak and how to communicate. And you are a communicator, so you know this. And I know that there are conversations like this that we are having that I can have that people will listen to because we sound the way we do. We have assimilated to a certain degree because if we sounded maybe like our cousins who didn't have all of this or didn't have the training or the wherewithal, would we be as far?
Do you know what? Yeah. I mean, that's the, and it's sad though, right? And that's the thing, because even in our own communities and our groups, even the conversation about accents, right? Because that's a little bit of a sensitive one for me, because I don't like, I take issue when there's certain people in our diaspora groups, and I see sometimes even in America, right, where people kind of put on the accent of a parent or a cousin and just try and make a joke out of it. Like, so they could be Nigerian, right? And they'll be like putting on the accent of their Nigerian mom. And there's a line, right? There's a line of, are you doing that because you want to illustrate a point, which is fine? Yeah. Or are you doing that to slightly mock, but also highlight that you're different? And that you've already said, like, you've assimilated better, quote unquote, into the system. And so when it comes to play in terms of accents, how we sound, and that isn't a, because do you know what? It's for me, it's taken, and I guess you're right, it worked. It was by design. It's a little bit like when I said earlier, there was my mother and father, though they spoke Yoruba to us, they never intentionally taught us. They didn't do what they mixed it with English. They didn't do what you really ought to do for children to teach them. To immerse them, no, I got you. Immerse them. But then I now recognise, and when we asked my mum, she was like, well, first of all, you're not going to speak Yoruba unless you're speaking to family. So what's the advantage when you're trying to get jobs in this country? So she thought it was advantageous to make sure that we sounded as British as possible. That was her that was the thing, even though she knows the game. It was like she had to play the game. And so you're right, you're right. So I have, assimilated. Here I am saying I'm not assimilated, and I ain't coming out. Girl, you like a whole product. Like, that's the crazy part. You like, wait a minute. That's why I said, like, that horror movie where you like, wait a minute, am I in Get Out? Like, what happened? Oh, I became that person. But then it's like, I was created to be that person. But you touched on, this is a point I am passionate about. You touched on a very important point. Because I'm the same way. I do not speak the tribal languages. And what was different is that my parents were two different tribes, so they didn't speak it to each other, but both of them spoke it to their family members. Neither one of them taught their languages to me. My parents are since divorced, and it's my mother I'm close to. My sister speaks, but that's a whole different thing because she was with my grandmother. But you have touched on such a powerful point. Like, these people have left their country to come to a place. And part of it is motivated by the descendants and the children and the offspring that they have. And they want to give you the best lot in life. What do? They look around and see, okay, what is the most successful? And they also know the pain that's been inflicted on them because they don't sound. Because someone made this point the other day on social media, which is right. You said, telling people they speak English with an accent. Everybody speaks English with an accent. It's just, is it an accent you're familiar with? You know what I mean? Because I'm American passport holder. To me, do you have an English accent? Yes. Can I place where the English accent comes from? Maybe, depending on who the person is. But I have an accent to you. But we both understand each other. Like, so even that idea, well, they speak this language with an accent. Well, hell yeah. And second of all, not even celebrating the fact that for some folks, it wasn't even their mother tongue, but they can even communicate in a way you understand, but you could not even touch
the languages that they speak, or, you know, if it's a small subset of people in Africa or someone from, you know, Korean, which you may know as a national language or whatever it is. So it's just, it's funny to me, like when people say these things, and I think even what you say, accents are powerful, because I think there is a line, right? I know that if I talk about my mother, depending on what she says, I might use her accent, only because my mother's really funny. Like, it's not, it's not like, I ain't gonna mock that woman, because if she didn't get over here, I would have been here. So I ain't gonna mock. Why am I gonna mock the person that gave me papers? Like, please, I'm not stupid. But like, let me serious. If the woman hadn't left, I too would have the same accent. So let's not mock that. Right. Let's not mock that hard. But you're right. I do think the posterity that people have to be careful. And I think especially stuff that I see on social media. And so I think even with your observations, you did a year. Did you do a year in the US when you went to school?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I'm so curious, because first of all, you were in Richmond, where my family is, because Virginia's my stomping ground. Like, so you come from the UK. That's actually a really interesting spot to come. And I think you and I are around the same age. So I'm thinking about around the time you came. What was, I think as a Black Brit, what kind of stuck out to you even coming to the US at that age?
So first of all, it was my second year in university, so I was 19. This was the year 2000. It was the year...
Before 9/11?
I was about to say it was a year... No, because I think I came back. I came back that year, so in September... Yeah. I was back in the August. I feel like I was back in the August of... So that year, 9/11 was...
2001.
2001, yeah. So I came back from the US in 2001. So it was just a year. So I was about 19. I must have turned 20 there. The biggest thing is, first of all, I had been bamboozled by the American dream.
You and everybody else, apparently.
Do you know what? I had this dream and I was so committed. And, you know, growing up on a council estate in Hackney, all I wanted to do, because we grew up with obviously American influence and Nigerian influence. Yeah. So I grew up with Nigerian music, specifically Yoruba films, like Nollywood, and bits and pieces of British stuff, obviously, because we're here. But in terms of seeing myself, like, I saw myself in Nigerian content, I heard myself with Nigerian music, and then I saw myself in American content, Eddie Murphy films. Do you know what I mean? Like Whitney Houston music. Like everything that was, so it was Nigeria, America, like Britain, But then I was like, if I can't, especially if I can't make, if I can make it anywhere, and it was at the peak, this was at the peak of like Oprah's time, right? Yeah. So I grew up. My mum loved every day switch on Oprah, and to see see my mum just enjoy that hour of like 45 minutes of Oprah, to see a black woman on TV. I thought, wow, and look at this black woman, like she's got a country in her hands. And I was like, what? Yeah. This was at the peak of her celebrity. So I was thinking anything is possible. Like I was like, America is a place to be. I have to study in that country. Now my parents couldn't afford to send me there to study full time, but for a year I found a good degree. An excellent degree, I should say, in Lancaster that would give me the opportunity to study for a year. Richmond, I tell you one thing, initially I wanted to study, like, I think it was in Miami or Florida, and I saw the brochure for Richmond, and Richmond campus.
It's gorgeous. Ooh. It is gorgeous. What? No, it is gorgeous. Like, many of y'all probably haven't been to U of R's campus. It is...
No, honestly, I was swept away.
No, it is gorgeous.
By the beauty. Because I was like, okay, if I'm going to do... You see, I should have taken some time, though, to read deeply research, because, like... I would have either stuck to Miami, or I'd have gone somewhere like, I don't know, New York. Of course. Or I would have probably gone, a bit more... I would have been a little bit more in a metropolis. Like, bigger... Yeah, no, I got you. Yeah. So, the biggest difference, because University of Richmond is a private university, so I had never seen this much money. Like, I was seeing people drive these big old cars on campus. Yeah. It's a small university, but predominantly white. The majority of my black friends were international. I did make some African American friends, black American friends, but the majority were the international students, which was phenomenal. It was a phenomenal experience, though. Like, it was hard because I think I should have, like I said, I should have done more research in terms of the region and the area. But it was a great location. Yeah. We used to go partying in DC. Yeah. But it was hard. And one of the things I learned very quickly was I was there thinking that people would obviously know there's black people in Britain. Obviously. I got there. And I was like, people were asking me the most basic questions. And then I think quickly my idea of the American dream just was washed in my eyes. Like I was like, hang on a minute. I was really thinking these people would be a lot like sharper. I was like, what is this? Like, why are you asking me if I've ever met the Queen? Like, if I've ever eaten with the Queen? Have I been to number 10? I mean, obviously you can go to number 10 Downing Street, but I was just like, there were some questions that they were asking me that I was like, huh? And they've never ever met a black Brit.
Right.
Like, yeah, I think there was one person or one or two people who either travelled or had been bought, who were originally Caribbean, maybe grew up in Britain and came. Like there were people who had some relatives or whatever, but majority of people had never met someone who spoke like me or was from the UK. So it was mad.
Well, and this is why I think it is so awesome that you are in communication and PR work, because let's be honest, we just spent time talking about when someone thinks of who's British, what do they see, right? I mean, it's the same. I have the same conversation with Black Canadians. People are like, they're Black people in Canada. I'm like, yes, they're Black people ever. Like, people are so surprised. We're talking about Western countries, okay? We're not even talking about other parts of the world. People are shocked when they find out. And if you think about the time when you came, we didn't even, it just was not as, like, had the wire come out? Because like I feel like I'm trying to think.
That's a good question.
It just wasn't like, for example.
I don't think so.
You know what I mean? Like, I and there's so I think now we have such an influx too of Black British actors that people can start to identify. But if at that time, we're talking 20 years ago, nobody was checking because nobody even knew, and nobody even knew. To me, I still think it's funny because if you have Black people in the US, why wouldn't you like?
Yeah, and this is it. And also, and I love what you just said, because thinking about it, we really think about whether we, like there's nobody, a Black Brit who's famous who's still in Britain. Does that make sense? Like, can you identify a famous Black Brit who is still here doing well that you could just name?
Who's not a footballer?
Exactly. And you have to know football, right? You have to be into football to know that not everybody is. So it's you got to think about, okay, if you can identify a Black Brit who is not necessarily in sports or football, like you rightly say, can you just name them who's still here? Most of them, most Black Brits just go.
I thought of one, then I'm like, I don't think she's there. I think she in LA. Tandy Newton.
I mean, she's like,
I know. Look, you didn't qualify. She didn't qualify.
She's half Brit. She's half Britain, half American. Like in terms of the half. Oh, sorry, yeah, literally, not literally. Sorry.
I was like, no, is she? I think what parents Zimbabwean and
what I meant was she's half in the US.
I was like, I mean, she just qualified. She is half and half.
But the reason that she, careful there. The reason that you know her, I think, though, really, is because she stars in Hollywood movies. Yeah. So she's really mainly because she's there.
Mission Impossible. I remember that. No, you're right.
Well, you're right. But she's half in the UK.
Well, I'm sure you saw this happen both in media and on social media, traditional media and social media, where there has been this ongoing argument, debate over Black British actors playing Black American characters, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly very specific. Like we saw it with Harriet. We saw and also the fortunate and unfortunate comments that have been made by people. And sometimes for me it's hard because I see the sympathy on both sides, right? I definitely see it. Yeah. And then, people talk about accents. And I said, okay, while we're having this argument, I would like to just tip my hat to all y'all who have bad African accents. And because if I was South African, all of y'all have played Mandela. and um,
honestly,
and Winnie. I'm sorry.
Honestly.
What's that light-skinned dude from Hustle and Flow? What's his name?
Terrence Howard.
Played Mandela at one point.
Wow.
Jennifer Hudson played Winnie at one point.
I don't think
exactly.
I remember seeing
Forrest Whitaker played Idi Amin at one point.
Idi Amin, yeah.
Will Smith played that Nigerian doctor from Concussion.
Yeah.
I just was like this. So if we gonna be having all this conversation, I would just like to put one in for the continent and say, all of y'all with your whack accents. all of y'all.
Oh my gosh. How many times has Morgan Freeman played Nelson Mandela?
Man.
Oh my goodness.
I'm not saying people are right or wrong about how they feel and what people have said. All I'm saying is everybody need to check themselves when it comes to African leaders and African stories.
Yeah. Of course. Even like, I'm trying to think. What's the other one? The Hotel Rwanda. Who played
Don Cheadle.
Oh, the actor.
Man.
Don Cheadle, right. There's so many examples.
And part of it is the scarcity that the media has created Hollywood, right? Or just like there should be a space for the Black Brit and the Black American and whatever Black African that wants to play whatever. But you make it and then you go, well, we have to have a name attached to it. But I'm like, but you could take someone who's not a name and make them a name if they've got the talent. And then you create this infighting within the diaspora where I'm sitting here going,
right.
I want all your stories to get told, but why we gotta be checking people left and right? Like, because there are not enough roles. Yeah. And so, I mean, so you have your own consulting firm. For the folks who don't know, tell them what it is and what you do.
Right, so my business is Ariatu Public Relations. It's a PR and communications consultancy based in London, but I've had international clients. My clients predominantly from the African and Caribbean diaspora, and that's by intention. They're in the creative enterprise field. I also have clients outside of that, but I have my clients. My clients have to intentionally want to speak to diverse audiences, right? So that's really what it is about. Or on a flip, it's just about honoring Black stories, Black businesses. So yeah, a lot of my clients, creative enterprise, small business owners and entrepreneurs, and it's been a fantastically exciting journey. It's been a challenging journey. But I'm doing well. I think I'm blessed. I mean, I can always complain. You can always find a reason to complain. We're human, right? but overall, I think I've done really well. I mean, it's been hard because being a Black woman in PR and comms in this country is a big challenge. And I'm quite vocal. I'm visible, intentionally visible, because I want to show other generations that you could do it. Young people, you could do it, and what's possible for them. But it doesn't mean it's easy, and it's not. I'm not trying to be a martyr as well, because there's been times where it's just like, I want to give up, right? Like, I think again, you're human, right? We all have those moments where I'm human, you're human. We have those moments. So I feel like this is the path I'm supposed to be on. I think it's really, really important to have Black representation in the industry. I think in the US, it's really interesting because I was inspired by the US, because I think in the US there's a lot more examples, visible representation of Black PR and comms professionals, and you can see the impact. It's really important that people understand the impact of PR, because it's not just about media relations or the traditional perspective of what a publicist is. What people think PR is. It is about understanding language, communication, reputation, right? How to handle a crisis, and all of these things matter. And I sometimes wonder if people just don't understand that, and especially in our communities, our diaspora communities, I think sometimes it's overlooked as a sector. But yeah, I've been here. I'm here.
You know, and I think if people aren't already, they should follow you on Twitter, because I think you, besides the fact that you are funny, but like, I think you drop some really good, you say some things that I go back and I think about, man, I haven't even thought about that from a communication standpoint, especially when people do something whack. So like this summer, obviously George Floyd happened, and, you know, there was this whole blackout movement. And I'm just curious as your thoughts as somebody who's in communication. You're like,
look how the world changed, man. They're like, wow, what?
I was just curious what you thought about messaging and in terms of the follow-up.
Oh, gosh, wow. You see,
right. The issue currently is, because it didn't stop.
The problem is people are very reactive and they want to show that they're doing things instead of fixing things from the core. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Fix the thing. You know, there's the optics of posting a black square or whatever it is that people chose to do. You know, it was it's a gesture, and you cannot solve structural problems, serious, deep-rooted problems with gestures. There has to be tangible change. And the messaging, you know, there was a lot of messaging around, you know, we see our black employees, we're going to do better. Well, do you treat your black employees well? Have you spoken to your black employees? Have you given them the opportunity to share their experiences in an authentic place? So what was interesting was some companies would issue a statement around that period, and they get backlash.
Right.
They get backlash.
Which was, I'm sorry, hilarious. For two reasons. One, first of all, when you say we see you, I mean, you saw me before. I'm dark-skinned, so I don't understand what that means. Secondly, I mean, even you light-skinned, you still saw the person. But second of all, I'm sorry, the backlash for some of these companies was kind of hilarious. Like, if you were on Twitter,
justified,
where people are like, oh, is that how you feel? Let me tell you, from the years of 2008 to 2015. I'm like, okay, so people are, at first you're like, okay, so people are angry. But then you're like, you know what? 82 employees in, I think y'all may want to just go ahead and just do the thing, because you are getting so dragged right now. And I used to just call people and say, y'all, you know who's getting dragged on Twitter right now?
Yeah, big companies too. It was quite amusing, to be honest. The receipts were coming out. Like, wow. And what was good was people got the courage. You know, usually some people are quiet, but suddenly people were like, you know what? I've been sitting on these receipts for years. Right. I'm gonna talk about my
when people are hashtagging this you, and I said, oh man, when I saw that hashtag, I'm like, bruh, you about to get dragged though. Like, I'm sorry, because somebody been sitting on this for like all their life to just let the world know. Right. So as a PR person, when you see that catastrophe happen, what is the appropriate response from a business standpoint? Like, how do you handle that?
So for me, I always say, I gave this advice to some clients, don't say we see you, say we see ourselves. Say we see the problem within. We know that we've not done a good enough job. For example, you've got to say the thing and say what it is that you're going to do to improve that thing, right? You have to speak about specifics, and you know, at that time it was specifically anti-black racism. It wasn't, you know, there are issues of discrimination and prejudice against a lot of minority groups. It's not that's not our speaking about black, Black Lives Mattering or anything else is not an erasure of any of the other kinds of prejudice, but you've got to be specific about one kind, this specific type of prejudice, and racism. So I think you have to really just say what it is, what you're going to do to address it, and how you're going to be held accountable. So every year, for example, you're going to address, look at your organization, look at the pay gap, because there's a pay gap, for example, between how much white employees are paid and black employees are paid. Employment, employability, education. If you're saying, for example, you can't find enough black talent, you have to start at the beginning. You're going to, start a scholarship at a university or something. Like, do something. If it's not a scholarship, identify talent in different areas, whatever it is. But you've got to say what it is you're going to do, and you've got to stand by it. And also, you have to allow space within your organization, safe space within your organization for authentic truth and voices to speak. Because we saw it even with, and we're allowed to say this now, so I'm going to mention a brand, Google, for example. One of their AI experts was, unceremoniously fired recently because she identified specific issues with some of their policies and their internal systems and protocols. Now, Google's been saying, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter, and they'll do their illustration and they'll say, oh yes, this. But when it comes to the crux of it, when it comes to actually respecting and honouring a Black leader and a voice, a Black woman in your organisation, you don't do what needs to be done. You just kind of just remove the rug from under her feet and let, feed her, so to speak, to the wall. So, I always say the proof is always in the pudding, and the proof is always in how these organisations they always show themselves, they always reveal the truth, right? And so I think it's important that as an organisation, you're honest, and you have to allow Black staff or whichever marginalised staff, but specifically in this conversation, Black staff, space to speak their truth authentically. Safe space. There's not enough safe space.
I think that's actually powerful. And what you said could apply to a lot of arenas, not just in PR and comms and messaging. And so I'm really hoping that as folks listen to that, because there are a lot of questions that come in after that, how do we address certain issues? I think you just laid it out. And so before we wrap up, I like to do this thing where I ask these 3 rapid questions. You just got to say what comes to your mind.
Ready?
You don't need to think that hard about it. Just, do you? All right. So my first question, if you didn't live in London, where would you live? I mean.
Okay. I'm going to say Dakar.
Why?
Senegal. Oh, that's because it just came to the top of my head, and that's the first place I thought because I was there before the pandemic. 2029 on holiday, had one of the most amazing holidays I've ever had.
My mom's been to Senegal and she loves it. And I was talking to someone else. Dakar, I hear people who just love it. And I've heard Senegal is just, at least Dakar anyway, is real chill.
Oh my God. You know what? Because having been to Lagos so many times, and right. Lagos is Lagos. You can never, there is no city in the world like
right.
Lagos is just mad, right?
Yeah.
And I love it, but it's mad. There is the chaotic energy. Sometimes you just want to chill. Dakar was just, it had that nice balance of just, I just loved it. I loved it.
I've heard good things. I've heard good things about it.
It's a great city. It's great. Senegal's beautiful country.
I'm hoping people, so post-pandemic, whenever this gets straightened out, it'll be on my list to go.
You've got to go. Yeah. It's great. I mean, every country has its problems, whatever. But honestly, just from that time, and it wasn't, it was a week. But I'm I want to go back. I love it.
Second question. Okay. What do you think's the best part of your job?
Ooh, the best part of my job is getting access to a lot of information that nobody else had. I know a lot about behind the scenes stuff. About. Right. I'm not going to just say about my clients, but just, you just knowing about the internal operations of an organization is really, for me, fascinating, and I love, I'm good at it's not really secretive, there's nothing that's really controversial about the things I know, but I do love knowing the ins and outs of how an organization operates. I think that's the best part. Being able to communicate that effectively is quite exciting.
Third question. This is funny. What makes plantains far more superior than any other carb out there?
Oh my God. It's the fact that it's just so versatile. You can eat it by itself, it's sweet, or you can eat it with something that's a bit more robust and peppery and just, plantain is honestly, you can boil it, grill it, fry it, you name it.
So I said this to some other folks who would get this. I was like, okay, so in my family, there is plantain fufu.
Oh yeah. That's the one thing I don't think I've tried yet.
Of all years of being a connoisseur of plantain. There's plantain fufu, and which, by the way, it works with the usual things you would eat fufu with. Because if you're used to pounded, because I think either pounded yam or the cassava version, what we call fufu, but I think the cassava version. But there's also the pounded yam version, which is very popular. And then of course, gari. You get your. this is like some context for some folks who are listening in.
Yeah.
But whatever you usually eat those foods with, you could substitute it with. So you can find it. You can find it. But I will say it takes, I don't know how much energy you use to like, because I don't make pounded, my sister makes pounded yam all the time. But like, I don't know how much if you actually make it, but like there's a little bit more hand energy with the plantain, but it is good. It is good.
It's the same. When we pounded yam, the pound
right? Not that you could go boil a yam and then pound, but I think this is where we live in the West part comes in because we're not quite there yet.
We have the powdered, and you put it, and to be buying yams and then pounding
I saw
it,
a yam
like
in the store the other day and got a little too excited. I was like, is that yam? I actually don't even like yams that much. Because when I was a kid, they used to make boiled yams all the time. Like, do you really, girl?
I love yam. Yeah, I love yam.
Plantain is far. But this is what I wanted to tell you, and I don't know if you saw this. I saw a tweet, and I don't think it was from you. Maybe it was from you. Somebody was making plantain ice cream. Like it could have been. Because I looked at it and I went, this is possible. Like I said, if it's really sweet, I could totally see. Because when it's really sweet, a plantain and a banana. What is this?
When it's sweet, it's sweet. It's really, sometimes sickly sweet. So it's definitely possible. But I had a question about plantain for food. Is it sweet? Or is it still quite savory?
It's savory. Like, I don't know what stage they pluck the plantain, but it's not, don't think of it as being sweet. Think of it definitely in that, like, if it was pounded yam or So that's why I think it works with, like, the regular sauces that you eat it with or whatever dishes, because it's not all of a sudden something super sweet and then something that's not, that would be really weird. Yeah, but it's, see if you can find it. I'm convinced because there are enough Nigerians and Ghanaians in the UK that somebody probably has it.
There's so many. This is what I'm saying to you earlier. There's so many shops that supply. I think I've actually seen it in one of our African food
and
shops.
try it. Yeah, no, my family. I say this because I saw them over the Christmas and they were like, "You want plantain for food?" I'm like, first of all. You guys are very funny. And I was like, also, yes, please. So anyway, Ronke, thank you so much for all this time. Like
thank you.
Was so pumped about having you because I just knew that there were things that really needed no introduction. We could just launch into it.
Same.
And so I appreciate your candor and your perspective and your wisdom. And I will make sure, as always, to hype you up. And, for everybody else, you definitely want to check out the links in the show notes and on the YouTube channel and everywhere else, because she just dropped some gems, even just off of her blog and the work she's doing. And I think if you're doing any kind of business, it helps to understand messaging and communication. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, and well done. It's brilliant. Really
well, for next time,
thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Global Chatter. The Global Chatter with the Black Expat is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is produced by Justin Williams. You can find the show wherever you get your podcast or follow us on our YouTube channel at The Black Expat Presents.